Ayya, may I speak about the Dhamma? Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Dear friends, welcome and thank you for participating in this day-long retreat, which is coming at the conclusion of the 2021 Vesak celebration week at Dhammadharini Monastery. I hope that during the morning you were able to stay quiet and peaceful and have some time for mindfulness and meditation and whatever activities you needed to do, that you were able to have awareness and clear comprehension in doing those things in a way that's conducive and supportive to the practice. The theme that I had selected for this retreat, I'm calling the Buddha's Legacy for Us. And I'm referring to those teachings that the Buddha offered, which are collected together in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. These talks were given during the 1 year leading up to the Buddha's death, to his final parinibbana. During this time, the Buddha knew what was coming, and he anticipated trying to pull together the most important teachings so that the Sangha, monastic Sangha, and the Sangha of Buddhist practitioners would be able to make it on their own without the opportunity to refer their questions to the Buddha, or to be constantly depending on the Buddha's skillful way of giving exactly the right teaching at the right moment for the right person at a particular circumstance. Instead, how we can become well established in the central principles, so that so many things that change and evolve will not cause the Dhamma to be shaken up, or to be turned upside down, or to become distorted. This sutta was clearly written after the Buddhas had already passed away. And we know this because it describes the distribution of the Buddha's relics after his death. So obviously that took place afterwards. And there are some other aspects in terms of the framing story that seems to clearly refer to developments that happened after the Buddha had passed away. There's one paragraph that is speaking about if some person or a group of people is representing that they heard the Buddha's teaching, memorized it, and they told you something representing this is the Buddha's teaching. And it's then recommending that one should not say yes or no, just listen carefully and memorize what they said, and then look it up in the text and see if what they're telling you is in agreement with the text which has been handed down. But the teachings of the Buddha were not compiled into text during his lifetime. That compilation happened shortly after the Buddha's passing away, and it was carried in an oral tradition through being memorized for the first almost 200 years. And then much later, it was converted to a written text form. So that idea is just something that happened a little bit later. In another case, it comes to the village of Patali, which is called Patali Gama. And in the sutta, the Buddha is predicting that Pataliputta would become, they're building a city there. He's predicting that it would become a very great city and be subjected to certain challenges. So in the decades, like within 100 years or within 60 or 70 years following the Buddha's passing away, the kingdom of Magadha expanded greatly, and the city that became known as Pataliputta became a great, powerful capital city, expanding greatly. And then even after that, 200 years later, Pataliputta, it was the capital of the Mauryan Empire in the time of King Asoka. And it was the capital of the entire northern part of India. In fact, at that time, it's said that Pataliputta was the largest city in the entire world. The Greek philosopher Megasthenes visited there. But at the time of the Buddha's life, the Buddha did not usually get involved in making predictions of the future like that. If through his psychic power he knew that Pataliputta was going to become a great city, it's just not his style to give that kind of prediction. And it seems more likely that sometime after the Buddha's passing away, when Pataliputta was already becoming powerful, that the compilers of the sutta had reasons to honor and recognize these powerful rulers that were located there. And so, in other words, the sutta is a very unusual mixture of things that are very similar to all of the teachings that we see in the suttas, and some things that are kind of unique, some things that are historical, some things that are almost like parables, or like a mythology, and some things that are the straight ahead Dhamma teaching. I'm not going to go through this entire sutta because that would take about 25 hours to do so. For this hour, what I want to do is point out some of the things that the Buddha mentioned about ethics, morality, and the procedures for maintaining social harmony. The setup story at the very opening of the sutta, to me, is a heart-wrenching parable of the dangers that we face and that the Sangha faced in the following years. At the beginning, the Magadha king Ajatasattu declared that he was going to wage war on the Vajjian people and conquer them completely. He asked one of his leading ministers, a diplomat, noble-born member of the court, to go to the Buddha and to advise the Buddha about this plan to make war and see what the Buddha has to say about it. Now, it seems very odd indeed that a politician or a ruler would ask the Buddha to advise about something as immoral as the waging of war, even for the purpose of conquest. It's not even a war of some kind of a righteous war, but just simply a war of conquest. And yet, this is what we see in ancient history, in Buddhist medieval history, in Buddhist early modern history during the colonial era when the Buddhist countries were colonized by the European countries. And in the modern times, we see that the Buddhist Sangha is interacting with governments and politicians and people who are sometimes mad for power and who are seeking the blessing of the Sangha in their power-crazed endeavors. And so it's like the Sangha of the monastic and the practitioners and those who have realized stages of awakening are a safe raft or perhaps an island in a sea of samsara, which is filled with many kinds of dangers. And so then the question is, how in our island of safety, our refuge of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, how can we interact in a wholesome and wise way with all of these dangers around us? And how can we be sure that we will never be swamped and never be overturned by these dangers around us? The Buddha I'm typing in the name of the sutta. Mahaparinibbana Sutta in the Long Discourses, number 16. The Buddha explained to this minister, Vasakara, 7 things, that practices that the Vajis had that made them strong and made them impossible to defeat in war. He said that if they even practiced one of those things, they would be impossible to defeat in war. And the minister Vasakara then said, "Very well, sir," and went away. And then the Buddha taught a parallel list of 7 things that the Sangha should do in order to be strong, in order to never be defeated, as long as these are maintained. And what are the 7? The first one is to meet frequently. These are particularly practices of the monastic Sangha, but I recommend that everybody should learn them and think of ways in your organization, your place of work or business, or your family, or whatever association or group that you are engaged with. See how you can adapt and use these suggestions. So the one is to meet frequently. The Sangha is required to meet twice a month on the new moon and the full moon. And when we have the meetings, everybody who's present at a particular location comes to the meeting. So it's not just a committee, not just the leaders, or not just a faction or some group or subgroup within the larger group, but it's including all. If a person is ill, they can give their chanda, but in general, it's including all. And this meeting, in the case of our Sangha, we have the clarity that the Sangha, which is united within one location, is independent to have their own meetings and make their own decisions. So if there is some bhikkhu or bhikkhuni who's visiting us, who's within our territory on the day for our meeting, if this is a bhikkhuni Sangha, that bhikkhuni would be part of that meeting, and we would have to have her consent for any decisions that were made. We do not have a pope. We don't have a requirement to consult different communities elsewhere, or to consult among all of the sanghas throughout the whole country, or all of the sanghas throughout the whole world. Although it's true in more modern times that the Sangha has created these higher superstructures that are supposed to have some authority over the local Sangha. In particular, under the influence of European colonialism, they thought that I guess it must have been the Portuguese were the first colonial power, and they thought that the Catholics were strong because they had a pope. And so the King Mongkut of Thailand established having a Sangha Raja, who's the king of the entire Sangha throughout the whole country of Thailand, and a council of elders, which is appointed by the king, which is trying to control and purify the Sangha throughout the entire country. And likewise in different countries, they have these larger groupings, but actually the structure that the Buddha gave is much more like not a tall hierarchy with the boss who's on a very high pinnacle ruling over many, but instead more of a lateral or a flat structure with many smaller units or smaller groups which are each independent. And in that way, the Sangha has a kind of a strength, like at our monastery, we have a kind of a bunch grass, which is a native of California. And the bunch grass in our monastery is more than 200 years old. So here's a clump of grass, which is just as old as a very old tree. And how does it come to be so long-lived? Well, it's sort of like low, and when the wind blows, the grass bends over. So the grass doesn't get demolished in the case of a hurricane. And in the case of a fire, the fire just goes through very quickly, and the grass just comes back and grows again. So this is the idea of meeting frequently. We do also meet our colleagues from different places, and this is part of having good relationships. The second point of this first set of 7 is meeting in harmony. For most of the decisions that we make, we come to a consensus, where everybody is in agreement with the decision. And once a culture of harmonious decision-making is developed, it may seem like it would take an awful long time to develop consensus, but because there's the value placed on cooperation and harmonious relationships, and a certain care is taken, there's this wonderful process of listening and attending, bringing up a concern or objection only if it's something that's really important, and having a shared set of values that we all are following the same principles. And so, because we all are following the same principles, if someone would point out, somebody making a certain suggestion, and they could say, well, this is not compatible with the teachings of the Buddha. And if that's a true statement, then everybody says, well, in that case, we don't want to do it, because we all have got a foundation of shared agreement about the principles that we're following. The third point is not to change the training rules. This means that, especially as we have gone through so many changes in culture, changes in history, changes in the circumstances, the way that original training rules are expressed is very much embedded in the culture of ancient India. And we sometimes need to look deeply to understand the purpose and the inner meaning of the training rule in order to see how to follow it in a way which is faithful to the inner meaning of the rule. So, for example, there are some minor rules of respect. A person who's standing, let's say a teacher who is standing up, would not give Dhamma teaching to somebody who's sitting down, because in the ancient times, that's like not how things were done, and it would be considered disrespectful. If the teacher is standing, the students should also be standing, or you could see like maybe in some kind of a court or a hierarchical thing, the king or the top person would be sitting in a chair and other people would be standing around. But then in modern times, we could be invited to give a speech in a big stadium, and you have 500 or 600 people or several thousand people sitting in chairs in a large hall, and the leader is up at a podium at the front of the hall, standing, giving a talk, and maybe walking back and forth while they give the talk, and it's not considered disrespectful. So we honor the original rules by understanding the inner meaning and the purpose of them. Next is respecting and listening to the seniors, the elders, those who have practiced for a long time, those who have wisdom, those who have some realization. Listen to what they say. The next is not falling into a pattern of, this is a kind of wrong view, of craving to be reborn in heaven. The next one is to use wilderness lodgings. This is a very interesting principle for our long-term survival. Nowadays, it's possible even the majority of the monastic sangha is living in towns and cities, living in houses that have doors and windows and flush toilets and electricity and Wi-Fi and so forth. But what the Buddha recommended is living in the wilderness, living in the forest, living in a place which is simple, and living in a place which is right there in with the cycles of nature. I extrapolate this rule to mean that it's very suitable for the Sangha to take up the cause of protecting the wilderness, making sure that the forest is not destroyed, making sure that there is still a forest and that humans have a chance to visit and experience the cycles of nature in the forest. So a kind of a commitment to saving the earth from climate disaster is in a certain way coming from this rule about the wilderness lodgings. In various times, both in Thailand, in Southeast Asia, and also in Sri Lanka, we have seen that different reform movements, when the Sangha seems to be going downhill and losing track and losing its connection to the point of the practice, that there would be reform movements that come along to go back and be more faithful to the original teachings, the original spirit of what the Buddha is teaching. And those reform movements would set themselves up in a wilderness, in a forest place, in a place that's very, very simple and wild. And then the last on this part is individually establishing mindfulness. And that mindfulness is the meditation practice of mindfulness. There's 7 more things that are very much connected with the practical aspect of life, which is supportive to our Dhamma practice. So in our Dhamma practice, we're very concerned about what's the state of mind, how are we sustaining wisdom, how are we sustaining awareness, keeping balance, how are we supporting our concentration, our the tranquil meditation, formal meditation practice. But in this sutta, it says again and again that meditative concentration is of great fruit and benefit when it is imbued with morality. So a person who's not well established in a lifestyle which is ethical and careful will not be able to go very far in their practice of formal meditation. This next set says, don't take delight or relish work or be a vassal to it. In other words, don't be a slave to your work. Obviously, we work. All of us work. Monks do a lot of work. Lay people do a lot of work. And it's not saying that we shouldn't work, but it's saying that we should not become addicted to work. Why is that? Well, one reason is that the busyness of work can distract from the kind of stillness that we need in order to develop wisdom, the stillness that we want in meditation. You might have noticed that sometimes when there's nothing to do, suppose you're on a retreat and you just go to your kuti and there are no books to read, the Wi-Fi doesn't work, there's nobody to talk to, you're just by yourself in your kuti out in the forest, and you have the entire afternoon and the evening before the next chance to listen to a Dhamma talk or have some kind of something else to occupy the mind. Sometimes the mind becomes uncomfortable. The mind can be uncomfortable with that stillness, or some kind of, there's like an inner dukkha about our state of mind, to whatever extent we've not developed and realized what there is to be realized in these teachings. Then if we stop distracting ourselves, then a person can start to feel this dukkha, this dis-ease, this just an uncomfortable, unstable state. And one way to get out of that unstable state is to distract oneself by working. And so then people who are not able to meditate, they will go and sweep their kuti, and then they would tidy their kuti, and then they would rearrange all the things in their backpack, and then they would sweep their kuti again, and then maybe they would find some soap and wash their kuti, and just do one thing after another, because they're not actually yet comfortable to be still. So this teaching is, don't let this habit of work be something that is used as a kind of escapism to prevent you from facing up to yourself. The next point is almost the same. Don't take delight or relish or be a vassal to talk. It's the same, exactly the same idea. Don't take delight or relish or be a vassal to sleep. Don't take delight or relish or be a vassal to company. So work, talking, sleeping, and company. Those are four of the great escapes that a person might be drawn to if they're not yet stabilized and able to enjoy the solitude of seclusion. But they have to be able to give those things up in order to make room to overcome whatever resistance that they have to seclusion. And then don't fall under the influence of bad desires, and don't fall under the influence of bad companions. And then don't stop halfway after achieving some insignificant distinction. So an insignificant distinction, that would be some accomplishment in meditation. Well, it can happen sometimes, especially with, it can happen with all of us. On a retreat or in a meditation, just because of some set of circumstances, one can have a really fantastic, blissful, concentrated meditation in which wonderful insights open up, and one can say, oh, I really see it now. I really understand something now. But if they stop there and just kind of like a relish, savoring that good experience they had in practice, they could find themselves months later or years later, still sort of remembering and longing for some experiences they had previously in their meditation practice, but they haven't known how to develop it and to go onwards and not to stop. I'm going to come back and circle back around for some of the aspects of wisdom and aspects of practice that were part of this checklist, what the Buddha wanted us to be really settled on. There's a second case, another anecdote that seemed, to me, it seems very poignant. This is set at that Patali village where I mentioned before. It was just a small village at a bend in the Ganges River. And it so happened that the same minister, Vasakara, and another minister were building a citadel in the Patali village to keep the Vajis out. So this was at the border between the two countries. And while they were building this a citadel, I guess building a walled city, it so happened that the Buddhists noticed that many thousands and thousands of devas were coming to that place. And somehow the devas were getting sorted out so that the most prominent and high-ranking people had their homes occupied by the most prominent and high-ranking devas. And people of lower status had devas or deities of lower status occupying their homes. This is a very unusual story, and it's not what we very often see in the Buddhist teaching, but it is describing something that's very real that we see in Indian culture, that almost every home in Hindu communities are in India in general, everybody's got a personal god, and there's hundreds and hundreds of different gods, and so a person would have an altar for their individual god, and they would reference and give respect to their god. And that seems to be what's being described here. Avasakara hears that the Buddha is around and invites them to a dana. And they give this extremely pompous and grandiose and glorified meal dana to the Sangha, which seems even kind of like a egotistical, the way it's sort of like a puffed up, the way this dana has been organized. And they, after the Buddha departs, he declares that the gate that the Buddha departed from is going to be called Gautama Gate. And there is a Gautama Gate in Pataliputta, and the ford that he used to cross the Ganges River is going to be called the Gautama Ford, and so on like that. And the Buddha gave a teaching to this group of arrogant politicians which is really different than the usual teachings, the kind of teachings that he gives to monks or to practitioners. He affirms and praises offering alms to those virtuous and wise spiritual practitioners. So this is encouraging the system where those who can afford to do so, especially if you have acquired your wealth through wholesome means, to share your wealth with spiritual practitioners, not only Buddhists, but all of the spiritual practitioners. And then secondly, that one should venerate the local deities. And he said, a man who is beloved of the deities always has auspicious visions. What I take from this, again, if you think that we are on an island, if we hope that our island has kept alive the true wisdom of the Dhamma, which has been passed down this time, and that we have the aspiration and the real possibility of realizing the deepest wisdom, of realizing the true nature of things, realizing non-self, experiencing the destruction of all of the corruptions, realizing complete freedom from hatred and greed, and coming to a state where there's no more rebirth, nothing more left to be done. That's the reality that we have on our island. But out there in the great ocean and in the world around us, there are those who wish for heaven, who don't have one clue about the full extent of what our aspiration is. But the Buddha does not condemn or criticize or set up a schism between himself and these others who are practicing deity worship. Instead, he puts it in a framework of kindness and virtue, and generosity. So the practice of generosity, practicing sila as a kind of generosity. In other words, if you don't steal and kill, it's kind of like doing them a favor because I don't kill them and I don't steal from them. And having this awareness of heaven is having an awareness of something which is uplifting, which is beyond oneself, and that can be a protection for those people. So the Buddha includes that in his teaching. That's his skillful means for these donors who are not at a point of being ready to listen to the more profound teachings. Here's another set, which is, again, it's about communal harmony, how we live our life. All of us are aware of the practice of the Brahma Viharas, of a meditation practice, a practice of shamatha, of tranquil meditation, involving the thought of loving kindness radiated without limit to all beings in all directions. The Buddha also recommends that our practice of kindness should be manifested in our day-to-day activities. So through acts of bodily kindness, acts of verbal kindness, acts of mental kindness. The harmonious Sangha in the shared chores or work that we have to do. If we know that something is good to do, that you do it enthusiastically, you do it quickly and easily, without any hesitation. Those are acts of kindness. Even a smile is an act of kindness. Even speaking in a soft voice, speaking in a way which is gentle, speaking in a way which is meaningful, speaking in a way that has the intention of the welfare of another person, those are acts of verbal kindness. And then the acts of mental kindness, in addition to the practice of meditation, there's a mental act in everyday life of being clear about what our intention is. So if I go to tidy up the workshop, if I tidy the workshop while I am thinking torturing thoughts about how I hate that the workshop is such a mess, and why do people keep putting things in the workshop, and they didn't put them in the right place, and thinking, thoughts that are like criticizing and mean while I'm cleaning the workshop. I may be doing a bodily kindness, but I'm not doing a mental kindness. But if I'm cleaning the workshop and I'm thinking, oh, if the workshop is tidy and well organized, it will be enjoyable for me and it will be enjoyable for others. And so I'm doing it with that good intention. So having the clarity about intention, that's what that means. And then that's 3. Then number 4 in this set, sharing our material possessions without reservation, even if it's just that we received some alms food to share it. So if in our monastic life, they very often give us some tea or some chocolate or something like that. And if some tea or chocolate is given to us personally, individually, we don't just go and take it to our room and use it like privately without sharing. Instead, we share. Whatever we receive, just share it. Then next is, in this set, is the spotless observance of the shared precepts, not only for our own clear conscience, but with this idea of sharing, that we're creating a common culture of virtue where people can expect one another to be virtuous, to be nice, to be kind, to be thoughtful, to be considerate. And the more we carry ourselves in that way, the more it's reinforcing that culture. And so then it becomes a kind of a synergy. It becomes a virtuous synergy where there's a feedback loop that's very pleasant. And it's pleasant for us and it's pleasant for everybody. So this is part of metta, loving kindness in action, is, not trying to emphasize individualism. Like there are several different interpretations among different sanghas. There are different interpretations about how certain rules and regulations ought to be observed. And so in one community, they would have be allowed to have soy milk in the afternoon, and in another community, they're not allowed to have soy milk in the afternoon. And so, if I'm in, this community, we're doing it one way, and every time I see that, I kind of like am saying, humph, well, I don't agree with that. I have a different idea about that precept. That's an unkindness, which is creating a kind of a wound in our harmonious observance of precepts. And it's truly not important. The most important thing is to use that ethics for the purpose of happiness, not using them for the purpose of hurting one another. And then the last of all, this is a kindness. It would be very kind to live according to the shared understanding or the shared view that is noble and emancipating, and that leads one who practices it to the complete end of suffering. So if we could practice in a way to obtain stream entry, or the path of stream entry, or the fruit of stream entry, or the path of being a once returner, or being a non-returner, or being a fully enlightened, that would be good for us, and it will be a fantastic gift to everyone around us. After the Buddha received that alms meal in a Patali village and told the assembled donors about venerating the local deities for the sake of their happiness, then he decided it was time to depart from there and go on to the next city, which was Kotikama. To do so, he had to cross the Ganges River. Together with a large group of disciples, they came to the Ganges and found that the Ganges River was extremely full. It was full right up to the brim. And there were many people trying to get across, trying to organize their raft and their boat, or trying to build some raft. And the Buddha and his disciples miraculously flew over the Ganges River. They disappeared from one side and appeared on the other side. Looking back and seeing all of the other people running around on the other side, still wanting to cross over. This is a parable for obtaining awakening by crossing the river. The Buddha then spontaneously spoke this poem. I'll give it to you in Pali and English so you can hear the sound of it. Yetaranti anyavang sarang setum katuana visajya palalani. Those who cross a deluge or stream have built a bridge and left the marshes behind. Kulan hijano bandati tinna medavino janati. While some people are still tying a raft, intelligent people have crossed over. The next verse that the Buddha spoke is about the crossing over. And this is the theme that I want to develop in the talk later on this evening. Here's another poem. Chatunnang Arya Satchanam yata bhutam adasana, because of not truly seeing the Four Noble Truths. Samsitam digamadanan tasutasuva jatisu. You and I have transmigrated for a long time from one rebirth to the next. Tani etani ditani bhavaneti samuhata. But now that these truths have been seen, the attachment to rebirth is eradicated. Uchinan mulang dukkasa natidani punam bhavo. The root of suffering is cut off. Now there are no more future lives. This concludes the talk, part of my talk, and I'm happy to stay as long as you would like to stay if there's any questions or comments about this. If there's a comment or a question, please put your hands in Anjali like this, and remember to unmute yourself when I call on you. Ayya, do you have something to add? Okay, Barbara?
I don't have a question, but I was so touched just listening to you chanting the poem and speaking the words, that it's kind of like if I had a question, it's gone. Just that moment is precious, is so precious. I don't want to continue talking. So thank you.
You're welcome. Diane?
Yeah, thank you. I love the chanting too. I'm glad this is recorded because I need to really listen to all those things again about all the rules. But one of the things that I thought of in the part when you were talking about the, the different sanghas could interpret rules in a different way, about the soy milk thing, say, or something. And then the mental harm that I guess that you would be do if you were thinking that it shouldn't be that way. And I remembered I used to do a lot of retreats at IMS. And on the 3-month retreats, the men and the women would sit on, the men on one side and the women on the other side. And I like that. And I guess I got attached to it. And then, and also at the Forest Refuge, when a monastic came, it was like they followed that too. But then there was a new staff person, manager, who changed that and said that the IMS culture wasn't like that. And so that was like upsetting to me. And I was even said to Powell, why don't you tell him, why don't you, because I thought it was disrespectful of this great teacher to do that. But, he just smiled and didn't say anything. And I think it was because he was practicing like what you said. And I had never, not doing any harm inside. He just noticed that,
So there's some things that we got to really stick to and stand up for, and other things that we've got to be completely flexible about.
Yeah.
And it's good to know the difference. And then even the things that we've got to really stick up for, we can be very clear and definite with our own practice, but we may not be able to impose it on another. So the way that Buddha taught those royal people to take good care of their local god and be generous and go to heaven, and not just leave it at that. You know, that wouldn't be a good practice that we would want to do as being the extent of our practice. But it's an act of kindness to be, you know, affirming and positive to whatever is not immoral that they're capable of. Yeah.
I think someone else has her hands in Anjali. I think Ruanti. I'm saying.
Oh, thank you. Ruanti. You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Venerable Sobhana, for the excellent Dhamma talk. There was a lot of things that I'm going to reflect again and again. And I learned many things that I could incorporate into my daily life. And I also, especially the part that you explained about kaya karma, mano karma, and vachi karma, how to be kind with our actions, words, and body, and especially the little example that you gave about while you're tidying up, how you can make a good mano karma with that. That really was a good point that I'm going to remember throughout the day. And thank you very much for the excellent Dhamma talk.
You're very welcome. And in addition to listening to the talk again, if you go to this sutta and read the sutta, then it will be reinforced. Of course, there's many different ideas in the sutta, and some lists, like the meditation that we did this morning on the perceptions. So that was like less than 4 lines out of this whole sutta. And the sutta is, 50 pages long. And so every nugget within that sutta is, referring to things that can be developed. At the same time, it's worth it. So this is it's a good sutta to read again and again. Don't get too confused by, there's a lot of anecdotes and stories in it, and then also a lot of teaching. The part that I'm emphasizing for you is the teaching part, because the Buddha went from village to village to village to village. He visited so many different places in that past year, and each time, each place, he offered teachings, like sometimes very similar and sometimes different nuances of the teachings. And then as he was coming up close to the end, when he was speaking to his own bhikkhus, he gave the most profound and sublime teachings. So it's even possible to sort of jump over some of the anecdotes and just look at like as if you were preparing for a long journey and going through your checklist to see whether you got it, and see whether you are aware of the meaning of one set of teaching and whether you can take it on board. It's a very good practice and a study that can be done with this sutta.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thank you, Diane, for pointing me out.
Yeah. If this is all we have, I'm happy to let you go and encourage you to take a set of meditation. Maybe you could do a bit of walking meditation after this, and then have a bit of a sitting meditation. That would be a very good pattern. And we will be coming back again at 6 o'clock this evening for the final talk and the closing blessings of this day of meditation practice. So thank you, everybody, for your patient listening. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.